Welcome everyone. Today we are going to look at the Archer Insights Approval app and we'll also compare it to the native NetSuite workflows. This app is built specifically for public companies and other companies ready for IPO, especially when they have to work with their auditors and need something more substantial to support their audits. The Archer app provides a smarter, more scalable, and audit-ready approval solution, like I mentioned. If you're currently using NetSuite built-in approval workflows and finding them inefficient or difficult to manage, you're in the right place. So let's dive in. Let's start by looking at some of the key challenges with the existing workflows. Now, NetSuite workflows are amazing and they're built to provide you with automation. But when it comes to doing approvals, especially for public companies and when you have to support your audits, it's a little different and we need to approach it differently. First, NetSuite approval workflows are manual, so it could be time consuming to build and manage them. Each transaction could require its own approval. For example, purchase orders, vendor bills, journal entries may all require separate approval setup depending on your company's policies, leading to significant administrative burdens, as you can imagine. Second, these workflows lack scalability. So if your company structure changes, you'll likely need to completely redesign depending on how it was designed in the first place, or for your workflows to accommodate new roles, departments, and approval rules. So all this is ongoing administrative headaches and ongoing expenses. Third, NetSuite approval system is we've received reports where sometimes when it's transitioning from one state to the other, it gets stuck because they're workflows, they're not scripts, so it's built a little differently. But like I said, these workflows are amazing for automation. So I want to make sure that I'm painting it in the right light. We're just talking about workflow approvals, and sometimes when it gets stuck, it does require administrative interventions. Finally, the audit compliance is weak, as you can imagine. They're not built from the ground up for audits. It lacks comprehensive audit history and fails to fully support the SOX compliance, making it harder to track approvals in a structured, transparent way. So with these limitations, it can create significant inefficiencies, especially around organizations that are scaling. But the good news is there is a better solution, and let's take a look at the Archer Insights Approval app. So first off, our app comes pre-built with features like withdrawal, retrigger, super approver, and detailed approval history, features that workflows lack out of the box. Second, it provides strong audit and compliance support, giving you full visibility into approvals and making your process SOX audit ready. Third, our system is highly scalable and flexible, so when your company evolves, your approval workflows can evolve too, without disrupting existing transactions. Fourth, importantly, email-based approvals mean users can approve transactions directly from their inbox without having to log into NetSuite, improving efficiency and user experience. And finally, by eliminating the need for manual workflow creations, Archer reduces management overhead and significantly cuts down on errors, freeing up your team's time for more strategic work. So if you're looking for a seamless, scalable, and audit-ready approval process, Archer Insights could provide a significant value to you. And now, with that said, let's actually transition into the demo. With that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Jim to go into NetSuite and start from the approval records and show you how it works in NetSuite.
Okay, so now I'm going to show you about our approval app. And what we're looking at here is a list of the approvals that have been configured in the system. So we have different types of records in NetSuite that we have configured. You can see them here. We will be looking at a department approval today. One thing I do want to point out, in this view, we can see which approval processes we've configured. We can also see some of the features that we have configured for these different records. So you can see those right here in the middle of your screen. We've enabled, for example, the super approval feature. So you can see that here. And you can also see on the right-hand side that we've configured some different email templates for some of these records. So the Approvals app allows you to have customized email templates for notifications, and you can configure the templates for each type of record. So let's take a look at our department approval process here. And you can see that our approvals app is not custom coding. Our approvals app is configurable here. And so what we're looking at is the options that we have. So up at the top, you can see that this is a department approval. We can see on the right-hand side which step will be first. So our approvals app allows you to configure approval processes with only one step or multiple steps. And we can see that our first step will be department step one. On the left-hand side, we can see some features. I did mention the super approval feature that I have enabled. And what that does is it lets you expedite an approval process. For example, let's say everybody is out of the office and you have received a written approval, an authorization to go ahead and approve the record. Well, here we can use our super approval feature, which is assigned to the administrator role. So you can choose one role or multiple roles for this feature. And then that user logged in as the administrator role, for example, will see a button at the top of their record that says super approval. We can also see some other features. We are able to actually lock a record after the record is approved. Let's say you have an approval process for journal entries and you do not want any edits to the journal entry after it's approved. You would just lock the record here with this feature. We can also see a skip submit for approval feature, which after you create a new record, if you don't want to click a button to submit that record for approval, the system can just automatically submit the record for approval. So we can skip the submit for approval. We can also withdraw an approval. So let's say you create a record and you have the record in the approval process, and for whatever reason, you decide that you do not need this record to be used anymore. It doesn't need to be in the approval process. You can withdraw the record from the approval process. We can also see one option here called retrigger. So if you have multiple steps in your approval process and you need the approval process to start over from the beginning, you can go ahead and retrigger. So at this point, let's go ahead and look at a department approval. So I'll go to my department list here and let's add a new department for information technology. So I'll click new department and let's go ahead and type here information technology, and we'll include all subsidiaries here, and I will go ahead and click save. Now, what happens when I save, the approval app immediately sets this new department to inactive. So we cannot use this department before the department has been approved. So if I go here to a journal entry, for example, and I go to this department list, you can see we do not have the ability to choose the information technology department. So let's go back to our department now and let's view our department. And you can see here at the top, we have our submit for approval button. We also have that super approval button that I described. I'm logged in as the administrator, so that's why I'm able to see that button. We can also see that the approval status of this new department is pending approval, and we can see who created this department here. So right now, I'm going to go ahead and click the Submit for Approval button, which will submit this department into the process. And we can see on the right-hand side, we have a department approval step field that was automatically filled in by the approval app. So we see this department is in the first step. Now, a very important feature here at the bottom, we can see the approval history, which it is saved with every record in NetSuite that is using the approvals app. So your users and your auditors can see this approval history throughout the process right here on the actual record. So now at this point, since the record is in the approval process, I will turn it over to my colleague Nitin to approve this.
And I'm going to see in my reminder that I have one department pending approval. I'm going to click on it. And I see that there is this Department Information Technology pending approval. I'm going to click on view and I see the approve and reject button here. I can check that all the information is correct and I can click on approve and I'll put in approve or anything else I might want to put in here. Hit okay. It will refresh the screen and now those buttons are gone, but it is still in the pending approval mode. Jim, I'll give it back to you.
Well, and now what we can see on Nitin's screen is that the department approval step field has been updated. So we know that this department is in step number 2 now. And so for step number 2, what we have configured is a different role. So that would be somebody else in the company who's using that role. The name of the role is the compliance role. So Nitin will go ahead and switch over to the AI compliance role.
Okay, so I'm going to go into the compliance role. And I see a reminder here as well. And I'm going to click on this. And I see the same department appear here. And this time I do see the approve and reject buttons. And I'll go ahead and click approve. Okay. Wait for the screen to refresh and there it is. Go ahead, Jim.
So now what we can see here on Nitin's screen is the approval history, which shows both of the roles that approved this record. The first row that we see was when I submitted the record for approval. We can see the roles that were used. We can also see the exact dates and times that these activities happened. Up at the top of the screen, we can see in the upper left corner that this department is no longer inactive. So now we can use this department in NetSuite. We see the department approval status is approved. And so now Nitin will turn it back over to me and I will show you that we can use this record. So now that the department is approved and the department is no longer inactive, we can actually go to the journal entry. And now we should see in the department list our new department that we can use. So now I will scroll to the bottom and I will show you where the actual approval steps are configured. So down here at the bottom, we have this approval child tab. Underneath that, we have our approval steps. You can see I have configured 2 steps for this process. And so the first step will be the role AI accountant. So the AI accountant will need to approve this department first. And then the next step will be the AI compliance role. So once both of those roles have approved this department, the department will be available to use in NetSuite. In this example, we're looking at an expense report approval configuration. So you see our configuration record here. Transaction type is expense report. We can see the features that we have enabled here. So the first feature we've enabled is the skip submit for approval. And the reason we don't want people to have to click a button each time to submit the record for approval is because we will have lots of different sales reps and other users who are submitting expense reports. We don't want everybody to have to go to the expense report and manually click a button to submit this expense report into the approval process. So our app allows you to skip that submit for approval process. You will actually see on the expense report under the approval history tab that our approval app records that the system did skip the submit for approval process. So you see exactly what happened with the record, and I will show you that in the next step. We've also enabled a couple of other features, the enable withdraw approval, in case the person realizes that they did not need to submit this expense report. They want to withdraw the expense report from the approval process instead of asking the approver to reject it. They can just withdraw. The next feature is the enable super approval feature, which allows the administrator role, which we have configured, to expedite the approval process if needed for any reason. If they receive a written approval from somebody to go ahead and expedite the process and not use the normal approval process, the administrator role will be able to click the super approval button to approve the expense report. So now I will go to my home dashboard where I can see my reminders portlet and I can see there are expense reports that are pending approval. So when I click on that, I can see all of these expense reports. So we will go ahead and look at this expense report here, 2126. And what we see here on this expense report is that the status is pending approval. So we do not see a make payment button at the top here. We cannot make a payment on this until the expense report has been approved. You can see the approval status here as well in the middle of the screen. We see that this expense report was submitted by Nitin, whose name is in the employee field, so we know who this is for. We see the dollar amount on the right-hand side. Now, what I mentioned a minute ago is that on the approval history tab here, we can see that as soon as this expense report was created, the approval app skipped the submit for approval step and automatically submitted this expense report for us to be approved. Now, if I go back to my approval record configuration and I scroll to the bottom, we can see that I have one approval step configured. It is approval type employee, which means these specific employees on the right-hand side here can approve the expense report. So I am listed as one of the employees. So when I go back to my expense report, I can see the approve and reject buttons. Now, since I'm logged in as the administrator role, then I can also see the super approval button that I talked about earlier. In this case, I'll go ahead and I'll approve this expense report and I'll type in my approval reason. And then when I click OK, the approval app is processing this approval. And we will see that once the approval is all set and I go to my approval history, I can see the details of my approval here, including my comment. I can also see the date and time. Now up at the top, I can see that the status has changed to approved, and I can see the make payment button. So now you have seen the entire approval process for the expense report, and we can go ahead and make a payment on this expense report. Okay, so now we have seen how to configure options for both a department as well as an expense report transaction. Now we're back at our screen, which is our approval records list that we originally looked at. So you can see in conclusion that we can configure approval processes for different types of records in NetSuite, and we can configure different types of approval steps. As I mentioned, we can have one step or multiple steps. And for each step, what I'd like to show you again is you can have different approval types. So what we saw for the department is we saw that our approval steps are using the role-based approval type, and we chose a role for each step. When we looked at the expense report, we saw that our approval type was employee, and we saw a list of employees here. I'd also like to show you another example, which is for our journal entry. We can see here transaction type is journal, and when I show you our approval steps at the bottom, we have one approval step. It is using a different approval type, role hierarchy approval. So when we use a role hierarchy, we can configure that here on this tab. And what you see here is a hierarchy of roles. And the way this works is we assign a weight to each role. So in this example, we see our first weighted role is the administrator role. So if the administrator creates a journal entry, then the roles that are weighted higher than the administrator role can approve this journal entry. So any one of these three roles can log into NetSuite and approve that journal entry. We definitely have many options for configuring our approval process. One of the other approval types is amount-based. So if you were looking at the approval record for a purchase order or a vendor bill and you scrolled to the bottom and you looked at your approval steps, you may have some steps that would say amount here under approval type. And the way that would work is we would configure different amounts in your system, either for specific employees, or we could even have an approval matrix configured here if you had different approval amounts for different purchase categories. So our approval app is flexible in the types of steps that you configure for your approval process. And these steps can be one step, multiple steps. They can be different types of steps and approvals, and they can even use different amounts and different categories. So that concludes the demo portion of our video. Now I will turn it back over to my colleague Nitin.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for your time today. We are excited about how Archer Insights can transform your approval workflows and make your processes more efficient. If you have any questions or want to see a live demo, please feel free to reach out, and let's make approvals smarter, faster, and hassle-free.